My life with a narcissist, what I learned. Living with a narcissist. This is the story of my life with a partner I loved wholeheartedly, who I thought was my entire world. My ex-wife was once my purpose, my pride and joy. I felt truly alive caring for her, providing for us. My life revolved completely around making her happy and keeping our relationship intact. When she hoovered back after mistreating me, I would thank God for bringing her back into my life, as if I had won the lottery. I saw her as my soulmate, the missing piece of me, even as warning signs appeared that we may not be so destined. The truth about living with a narcissist, ensnared by fantasy, the intoxicating love bombing. I'll never forget the night I first met my ex-wife at a friend's wedding reception. She commanded the room instantly in a bold red dress, entrancing every man present. But to my surprise, she approached me instead with laser focus, effusively complimenting me. I was so flattered by her intense admiration, unlike the apathy I was used to. We had instant chemistry and connection, chatting for hours. She quickly insisted we were destined soulmates. Her extreme infatuation filled an emotional void in me and stroked my deflated ego. After years of minimal affection, her love bombing intoxicated me with a fantasy of finally being someone's dream partner. Within mere months, she pressured me to propose and move in together. When I expressed hesitation about the rushed timeline, she used threats and manipulation to get her way, sobbing that I must not truly love her, threatening to leave me for someone who would commit. Against my better judgment, I gave in to her demands, too enthralled to lose this woman I had put on a pedestal. Only later did I realize her fairy tale romance was a calculated means of securing control, not an expression of genuine passion. Living alongside a narcissist, the unseen battle, the mask slips, from romantic bliss to walking on eggshells. Shortly after our picture-perfect storybook wedding, my ex-wife's mask started to slip. Her moods became wildly unpredictable and explosive in response to minor, insignificant issues. She would be perfectly affectionate one minute, only to erupt in screaming, throwing things and sobbing the next over something as small as me, wanting some alone time, or making separate dinner plans with friends. I became hyper-vigilant, constantly walking on eggshells around her, desperately trying to prevent triggering her angry outbursts. But I realized her temper tantrums were impossible to avoid, since anything and everything could be a trigger. She would create unnecessary drama even when I hadn't done anything wrong, just to play the victim and keep me on edge, ceding control. Our once beautiful home rapidly devolved into a war zone of constant chaos and tension from her attacks. But I clung to the hope that the kind, charming, loving woman I had fallen for during our honeymoon phase still existed somewhere deep beneath this stormy new facade. The reality of coexisting with a narcissist, the two faces of a chameleon, angel in public, demon in private. My ex-wife was a complete chameleon. Her personality constantly shifted into whatever suited her agenda in the moment. In public settings, she was the life of the party, universally beloved and praised as a generous, big-hearted angel. But behind closed doors in private, it was like her giving spirit instantly vanished. She demanded I shower her with expensive gifts and luxuries on a daily basis, while point-blank refusing to seek employment or contribute financially in any way. She flirted shamelessly with other men right in front of me, then painted me as crazy and controlling when I got upset over the blatant disrespect. To outsiders and friends, she portrayed herself as morally superior, beyond reproach, while painting me as the problem in our relationship. But when we were alone, her tune would change entirely, claiming others were jealous of our passionate love and intentionally trying to sabotage us. Her projection, gaslighting, and pathological deceit were absolutely exhausting. I ended up managing all household, financial, and emotional burdens single-handedly while my ex-wife relaxed, acting helpless and childlike, never lifting a finger. She threw theatrical tantrums and emotional meltdowns if I did not accommodate her latest frivolous demand, whether an extravagant shopping spree or lavish weekend getaway we simply could not afford. For far too long, I tried to explain away her behaviors as innocent naivete and youthful irresponsibility, when in truth I was being used and manipulated, not loved and cherished. She violated every personal boundary I tried to instill with hurtful remarks and shameless affairs, then accused me of being too sensitive, paranoid and needy if I objected to her treatment. Intimacy became merely transactional to her, a tool of reward or punishment for acquiescing to her wishes or daring assert my own. Yet if I truly put my foot down, she would withhold all affection and sex, often for days on end, as a way to spite and punish me for non-compliance. I grasped only at empty air when I reached for authentic emotional connection from this elusive mirage disguised as my wife. That narcissist's impact, dimmed in a light, death by 1,000 cuts. Over time, my ex-wife's control, criticism, and contempt became completely unbearable and inescapable. She monitored my every move obsessively, fabricating absurd suspicions about my friends and hobbies, simply because she could not stand the idea of my having independence from her will. She tried to slowly limit and isolate me socially, only to activities and people that did not threaten to shift any focus away from her swirling black hole of need. She consistently dimmed my inner light with her cruel insults, mocking the passions and aspirations that had once brought me so much joy before her darkness descended. I gradually withdrew from previously beloved hobbies, interests, and friend circles just to avoid provoking her narcissistic rages over me having a separate identity. I felt unable to openly express myself without walking on eggshells, always living in fear of her volatile moods. The dreamy admiration and praise she once lavished on me early on had completely morphed into a nightmare of constantly feeling inadequate, worthless, and defined only by her scorn. According to my ex-wife, I was selfish, lazy, and never meeting her needs, no matter how sparse my own had become. But the truth was that I had completely burnt myself out physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially, trying to solely support the two of us in every way possible, while she lounged around our home uselessly day after day, never lifting a finger to contribute. No matter how much I sacrificed of my well-being to cater to her ever-increasing, insatiable demands, it was never enough. She resented any care, time, or attention not directly focused on her perceived needs. I struggled to recognize myself in the mirror most days. She had succeeded in molding me into a hollow shell of the man I was before by incrementally dimming my inner light over time. Yet her pit of emptiness could clearly never be satisfied, no matter how much she attempted to consume my soul and agency to temporarily fill her own void. Surviving and thriving with a narcissist, unmasking the inner predator beneath the sheep's clothing. For far too long, I wrongly blamed myself for the deterioration of our relationship. I thought if I just tried harder to understand my ex-wife's issues and support her better emotionally, our connection could return to being as blissful as it was in the very beginning. But the increasingly severe abuse, volatility, and cruelty never stemmed from my own shortcomings. They arose directly from her inner demons, including toxic shame, unhealed childhood trauma, and cripplingly low self-worth. Her demeaning behaviors were merely projections to externally vent the powerlessness and self-loathing she refused to acknowledge or address within. Tearing me down provided relief from confronting her own pain and created an illusion of control she desperately lacked internally. One night, my will to endure finally broke when she physically attacked me for the first time after I calmly asked for separation during yet another alcohol-fueled, irrational rage. When I then threatened to call the police, she chillingly responded that the authorities would never believe my word over hers as the helpless, blameless wife. When I forced myself to look into her enraged eyes in that moment, I did not see a shred of the woman I had fallen so deeply in love with years prior. She was a complete stranger to me, cold, dark, and utterly soulless inside, without a hint of empathy or conscience. The comforting illusion of unconditional love between us had completely vanished, exposing the harsh truth beneath her fabricated mask. I realized then that I had invited a wolf dressed in sheep's clothing into my life, home and heart, much too eagerly. This predator had simply mirrored my longing for affection long enough to ensnare me deeply within her web of control, taking sadistic pleasure in watching me emotionally suffer once I was fully entrapped. I finally found the courage to permanently escape that very night, refusing to continue sacrificing my spirit to sustain a one-sided fantasy any longer. I embraced the painful but liberating clarity that the charming, devoted partner I had once adored so intensely existed only as an illusion within my mind that could never manifest in reality with this disordered woman. I went completely no contact without another word, blocking her on all platforms when the barrage of faux apologies and empty promises to change inevitably came. I owed it to myself and my drained soul to break completely free of her self-serving entanglements and manipulations for good. Coping with a narcissist, my reality. Surviving the smear campaign and flying monkeys. In the weeks following my escape, my narcissistic ex-wife swiftly launched into a calculated smear campaign to ruin my reputation and turn our mutual friends against me. This was punishment for daring to abandon her twisted web of control and toxicity. She played the victim role flawlessly in public, convincing even our closest friends and family members that I was the cruel, abusive one who had mistreated her ever-so-loving self. No matter how reasonably or gently I tried to share my lived experiences of emotional blackmail and manipulation, she had them all so deeply brainwashed that they outright branded me a liar. I was blindsided time and again by trusted former friends, shunning and scolding me in public based on her distorted tall tales. Over time, I came to realize my ex had gradually groomed numerous unwitting, flying monkeys under her hypnotic spell throughout our relationship. Easily manipulated enablers who bought into her lies without question and did her bidding. Most seemed far more personally invested in the dramatic gossip itself than in uncovering the truth of events. Eventually, I gave up desperately trying to reveal reality to anyone still dedicated to upholding her false, saintly image, despite countless red flags. I came to understand my inherent worth was simply not defined by those clinging to pretty facades and fictions, rather than acknowledging the full, ugly truth of her abusive behaviors. I turned my energy inward, focusing on my own healing journey and emerging stronger rather than fruitlessly attempting to convince others of what I had endured. Being the bigger person meant approval from her manipulated flying monkeys was ultimately irrelevant in light of my newfound freedom. They could attack my character and choices vociferously all they wanted without provocation now, but I was no longer shackled by her darkness, while they remained chained out of willful ignorance. My life, a narcissist's influence. When a storm rages inside, the aftershocks of abuse. In the immediate aftermath of leaving my narcissistic ex-wife, I was consumed by overwhelming hurricane-force winds inside my mind, bone-deep rage, profound grief, dark numbness, and despair cycling relentlessly through my heart space. I frequently found myself lashing out in misdirected anger at close loved ones as I processed the betrayal trauma and mourned the death of so many dreams I had invested in for the future. Therapy eventually helped me realize this anger arose as a shield against the sheer pain and devastation of recognizing the abuse I had endured all along when I was still deep in denial. I learned healthier coping mechanisms to express my turbulent feelings rather than suppress them, though it remained an uphill battle. Some mornings, I awoke feeling utterly paralyzed, unable to get out of bed as I ruminated endlessly about everything I wished I had done differently to escape the abuse sooner, blaming myself mercilessly. Other times, obsessive panic attacks about what the future held for me now that my life had been completely upended would overwhelm and debilitate me. I was ultimately diagnosed with severe PTSD and clinical depression as a result of living with her narcissistic manipulation and volatility for so long under the illusion it was normal love. But with extensive counseling plus the right path, support and regimen, my moods did gradually begin to stabilize again as time moved forward, if not completely flatlined. The intensity and frequency of the storm within me decreased substantially, bringing me slowly back from the edge of the abyss bit by bit. Sharing vulnerably about my experiences in abuse support groups and with trusted friends who simply listened with compassion finally dissolved the overwhelming sense of isolation my ex-wife had burdened me with for years. I discovered scores of others who had walked this agonizing path with narcissistic partners before me and survived, which restored my wavering faith that these painful emotions were only temporary and that the light would shine again someday. I became determined to embrace my struggles with pride, self-love, and acceptance rather than judgment or toxic shame. 2 years later, the internal hurricane has largely dissipated into stillness, though triggers still arise on challenging days. But mindfulness practices keep me grounded mentally in the calm, present moment rather than getting trapped in the painful riptides of the past. Reconnecting with passions like art, music, and nature that once brought me joy is slowly rejuvenating my weary but resilient spirit. Laughter and inner light fill my heart once more after too long drowning in darkness. Her abuse could only ever dim my inner radiance temporarily if I gave her that power through belief. Today and all days forward, I confidently take back my power and define myself. Life and struggles with a narcissist. Rising from the ashes. Post-traumatic growth. Surviving my narcissistic partner's twisted manipulation and mind games ultimately taught me invaluable lessons about life and myself that I am still integrating. By rebuilding my sense of self-worth and identity from the ground up, I rediscovered my own muted voice and passions that had been slowly buried under her crushing expectations. I relearned how to trust my inherent intuition regarding red flags early on, instead of brushing past them in my longing for love. I found the courage to set highly defined boundaries aligned with my values moving forward, honoring and asserting my needs unapologetically instead of betraying my core self, just to keep scraps of a one-sided relationship temporarily intact. My inner peace and integrity now take priority over all else, especially validating others. Most of all, I now clearly see that authentic, mutually caring partnership should never demand constantly sacrificing your soul or proving your worth through quiet suffering. Her disorder alone was the primary problem all along, not my perceived deficits. While excruciating to endure, that traumatic relationship served as a rebirth. I emerged on the other side with heightened wisdom, discernment, and compassion that could only have been forged by walking through those flames. Although my narcissistic abuser intended to destroy me from within, I refused to grant her that final victory or power over my mind. I survived and claimed my life anew as she faded into the past. The future now shines far brighter with hope and limitless possibility, having broken free of her darkness. I boldly walk forward one step at a time down a path toward deeper fulfillment, aligned with my rediscovered truth. This is merely the beginning.